The budget that you introduced at a prior meeting, I hand-delivered that to the state officials, Division of Local Governmental Services. And as background, they're having a tough year this year in reviewing budgets timely. So we received guidance that if the state does not respond to us with any of their budget comments, that your public hearing, that you should basically have the voice of the people, have any kind of comments you like, but take no official action at that time. In addition, the governing
used to take no official action.
Right, you can't pass the budget without having the state's blessing and their review of both. Sure, their budget review of the annual financial statement and the budget document. And I can tell you that chances are that we'll, as probably has happened in the past, we'll be doing a budget amendment to kind of get it in line with what the state wants. In addition to any kind of immaterial figures that we may need to adjust. We found one small one that will basically offset with both trimming other areas of the budget and probably an appropriation reserve transfer as well. So the good news is that everything's fine. So we'll have that. This budget calls for no tax increase, and obviously that's always good news and an easy budget to review at the outset. So I'll turn it back over to you, Administrator.
Yet again, at the last meeting I had gone through the line items almost on a line-by-line basis. I did want to just reiterate a few general aspects. The direction that the administration was given from the Finance Committee was that we should be focused on reducing spending where possible, and that the goal was to have a zero tax increase. This budget, as presented, had both a zero tax increase and a reduction in the amount of spending that was actually proposed for this year compared to last year. Last week I indicated that we would also have additional information regarding, there were, I guess, specific questions on the allocation of salaries and wages, which has been provided. In the past, I believe there have been some employee positions, including the governing body, that were allocated among the current fund, which is tax supported, and the utility budget, which is ratepayer supported. There are no tax dollars, but rather on the utility side, the revenues come from the utility billings that the property owners receive. We've provided that information, and you can see that this year there is no allocation of utility costs for the governing body's salaries to the utility. Additionally, we have greatly simplified, I believe, the aspect of the allocation between current and utility. Specifically, one individual in the finance office, specifically the tax collector, her salary is allocated 50-50, half water and sewer, half current. One other individual in that office has their salary allocated 65% to the utility, and then the balance split between general administration and tax collection. On the public works side, which is where most of our water sewer salaries come from, there are a total of 3 individuals whose salaries are allocated to the utility. Obviously, our licensed water operator has 100% of their salary allocated there, and then 2 of the laborers in public works have their full salary allocated to the utility. The public works superintendent / utility superintendent, his salary is allocated as 1/3 to water sewer, 2/3 to the tax supported general budget. And that is the extent of our salary and wage allocation between the utility and the current fund.
I just want to point out though that in the prior CFO, Colleen Lapp, had felt, and she changed it to the allocation where the council people 1/3 because of the fact that we administered and we voted and everything else. So I mean, I don't think that it necessarily was wrong. I mean, it's a different mindset and a different, and you want the utility surplus flush with money. But actually, we do vote on the utility budget. We do.
I don't disagree.
So just as you having the employees that do service the water utility, you have their salaries, a portion of their salary on. I mean, I do agree with Colleen Lapp when she said, okay, this is what we should do because you do administer something from, you do vote on it, you do run the utility budget, and so therefore salaries from us, 1/3 should be attributed to the utility fund.
And again, I don't dispute
But I see how
the appropriate...
it's making it flush, making it.
And more importantly, I think that in an effort to provide transparency in the budget, it's a much easier explanation that, the governing body salaries are paid by tax dollars, and although admittedly a portion of your time, certainly last year, a large portion of your time was spent on water and sewer issues, for the few $1,000s that's involved, in the sake of transparency, the trade-off was, let's make it a simpler calculation so that you don't need a score sheet to figure out whose salaries are being charged for.
I think
it was about transparency and really just cleaning up those books.
Well, transparency would really be to allocate it where it should.
My rough math has basically a $5,000 charge to a $2 million, utility, so it's immaterial, and especially I think more so was the concern about the day-to-day laborers, how their salaries are being allocated. Certainly, we can amend any budget during this process.
Oh, no, I'm fine. It didn't matter to me one way or another. I'm just trying to say that Colleen had good intentions for what she did, and it wasn't.
I didn't mean to imply otherwise. Additionally, I've actually had mentioned that we would be discussing tonight information regarding debt service, and I had previously distributed to the council copies of both the annual debt statement and the annual financial statement, most of which information has been summarized as part of the budget worksheet that you saw previously. I did, though, I had indicated, and I did want to distribute to you this evening, a projection of debt service for the next 15 years. And it really highlights two significant aspects of our debt service. Specifically, this year, well, let me do it this way. Last year, on the utility side, was our final payment on the 2003 debt. And that's evident in the 2012 column. You'll see that we had both an appropriation for the 2003 debt in the amount of $43,000, as well as our first payment on the 2011 series of debt obligation in the amount of $55,000. So last year, our total utility debt service, and I'm talking about just the pay down, not the interest cost, was $98,000. You can see that for the current year, 2013, that number has spiked up. And the reason for that is that in the current year, we are paying down the final payment on the old debt service in the amount of $123,000. And then this is our first year, our second year payment on the 2011 debt service. So you can see that our utility pay down on principal is $178,000 this year, compared to $98,000 last year. So that's a fairly significant spike. The good news is that it's a one-year spike on the utility side. And you can see that starting next year, our debt service on the utility drops to $55,000, and then progressively is relatively stable, although it does increase at roughly $5,000 a year for the next 10 years until that debt service is paid in full. On the current side, likewise, you can see that last year was actually our final payment on the 2003 debt service in the amount of $76,000. And last year we also had our first payment on the 2011 bonded indebtedness. So last year's current pay down was $166,000. In this case, we have a dip, a significant dip, where our debt service on the current side is only $85,000. And again, you can see the progression, and for the next 13 years, that increase is roughly $5,000 a year until it is paid in full in the year 2026. There's obviously corresponding decrease each year in our interest costs, and we'll see that as well, but we have not, in order to simplify the discussion, just wanted to point out that we have these two significant changes this year on our debt service. Our current debt is dipping, our utility debt is spiking. And next year, that sort of reverses itself, and from there on in, we're looking at a relatively level debt service cost for the next 12 years. And that is significant. That does represent all of our bonded indebtedness, absent any agreement and approval by the governing body moving forward. We are developing, again at the direction of the Finance Committee, a pay-as-you-go, so that we'll start putting money aside for capital projects and capital improvements before they're needed, hopefully with the goal of not having to incur the cost of going to permanent bonded indebtedness. So that's a worthwhile goal. This is a great time for us to be pursuing that. While we're on the subject of debt service, I'll also mention something that we've mentioned briefly at the last meeting, our capital needs this year. We have really not included, and nor do we project, any significant capital investment this year. There are a couple of exceptions, one of which we'll talk about when you see that we've recently been notified of the award of a $175,000 grant for DOT. And we'll have some more discussions on that, because we may be looking at a match, and where that match will come from is something that the council will need to make a decision on. And I expect we'll have a full discussion of that at our next meeting, which time we'll also have developed a more detailed cost analysis for both the construction as well as the soft cost engineering and design fees involved in that project. In any event, this current budget, we have, and I may as well talk about them specifically and individually. On the current side, and again, I'm going to refer to the worksheet that previously was distributed because I find it's easiest to reference. On page 8, at line 34, is the capital expenditures in our current fund. You can see that last year we appropriated a total of $10,000, $5,000 for the capital improvement fund and $5,000 for building improvements. This year we are appropriating, or this budget proposes, the same $10,000. However, it's allocated somewhat differently. Typically, money is placed in the capital improvement fund to provide the necessary down payment if we do issue any bonds or notes. Because we don't anticipate doing that this year, we have reduced that from $5,000 down to $1,000. But likewise, we have increased the appropriation for building improvements. It's certainly my experience from last year and the early part of this year that if there are any areas that come up during the course of the year for capital improvements, it's generally in our buildings area. So we're allocating appropriating the same $10,000, but simply distributing it a little bit differently on the current side this year. And that's the change. On the utility side, likewise, on page 9, starting at line 35, this is the capital improvements on the utility side. Last year, we appropriated a total of $60,000. Again, $45,000 into the capital improvement fund, indicated as down payments on improvements, and the $15,000 in the capital improvement fund. Again, we do not anticipate any projects in the current year that would need to have the down payment requirement. Therefore, we have reduced that $60,000 total appropriation down to $40,000 and placed it in a new line of capital outlay. It is our intent to start the process now of paying as we go. This $40,000 provides $40,000 in spending in the current year for capital improvements for our utility. Specifically, we are developing, and we're actually have started a hydrant replacement program so that we've identified approximately $20,000 on the water side of the water sewer operation and $20,000 on the sewer side, the sanitary sewer side of our operation, that we can pay for as capital improvements, starting this pay-as-you-go process. It is our hope that in the coming years, we'll see this expanded to provide fully for a pay-as-you-go program. So that's a significant change. And essentially, the capital improvements that we've just talked about are funded one of two ways. We either fund them in the budget annually, or we do a bond ordinance to provide debt to pay for them. So again, it is our goal to reduce and/or eliminate the need for any future debt by starting a pay-as-you-go.
Are we saving any money for, I mean, we just had to take out a $1.5 million bond for equipment. And what I wanted to do last year, which I believe was told that we couldn't do, was start saving $75,000 per year, so in 10 years, we don't have to bond that money.
That's exactly what I'm talking about, is
Okay.
developing a program.
$75,000?
I don't know the exact
I'm
number.
hearing 10, 5,
Yeah,
I'm hearing 75, we need $75,000.
Well, actually, if you include fire apparatus, that number is probably closer to $150,000 a year. As I mentioned at our last meeting, we are in the early stages of developing what I would call an asset management plan to look at the replacement value of all of our buildings, facilities, and rolling stock equipment for public works, and develop a planned replacement schedule.
To stagger it.
And do we have anything in, because I don't believe
We
we had anything in last year's budget. Do we have anything in this year's budget with regards to that?
We do not. And
Is
again,
there something that you would anticipate going forward in subsequent years, that we have a piggy bank for the rainy day?
absolutely. And it's typically done as a reserve for an appropriation, a capital reserve for specific projects.
Those 2 years behind the 8 ball already. For 2 years, last year we didn't save any money initially.
Well, and again, last year on the current side, we had the debt service issue that I had mentioned, because we had the spike. And admittedly, yes, we are, although we do have a significant amount of money in our capital reserves, they are not identified for replacement of specific projects, equipment, or property.
Right, but that's been there 2 years ago, that was so.
Well,
I'm saying we're saving money per year to replace the vehicle. We couldn't afford, we had all that money already in reserve when we took out the bond for $1.5 million in equipment. And then what I thought the idea was that we were going to start saving $75,000 a year so that we did not have to do that the next year. We didn't have to buy equipment on a credit card.
well, exactly.
So that was my understanding, but we didn't do it last year, and we're not doing it this year.
That's correct. We have not implemented that for this year. Although you're going to point to what our capital reserves currently are?
Yes, and the current general capital fund as of 12/31 unaudited figure is about $51,000. In the general obligation fund here, $51,000. And also in the utility fund, we have $322,000. So if you're thinking as far as going to your point, $51,000 is sitting there right now to be used for future capital projects. I think from the time I got here that we actually appropriated directly out of that, as opposed to going out for bonding for recent capital ordinance from last year, size and stuff.
We have a little water authority, so I really like the fact that we have a nice little, and I consider it little. I mean, that's 300, when you have your own water authority, if something goes wrong with the tank,
Sewer.
that's a big item. If something goes wrong with our sewers, it's a big item. And, so, the fire hydrants, replacing which is what we're doing every year. We're replacing 4 a year, which is pay as you go. That's what I understood. It was pay as you go. For a year, fire hydrants were replaced. So, I mean, I don't think I want to consider the $300,000 in utility surplus in any way to talk about the equipment that we need for the DPW or anything else.
And Council was never
Police
intended.
or whatever.
We have to firewall those funds. Sewer capital is a separate fund that has a 322, and the general obligation, general capital, I should say, has the 15 change. So those have to be firewalled, and those will not be commingled in pursuit of capital.
But Mr. Nea's point, setting aside money for preventative maintenance and capital needs, we had the 2 garbage trucks that were 17 or 19 years old?
19.
19 years old. and that the can was kicked down the road by councils. Formerly, years ago, the councils did pay as you go, so I wouldn't be opposed to having a, you know, you can't have a crystal ball or anything else, but I mean, if we could avoid bonding ever again, I'd be delighted, you know.
One of the difficulties is doing that, and as I said, we're in the early stages of developing a longer-term asset management plan. And again, I'm glad you pointed out the bifurcation of the utility, which actually should be treated differently for a couple of reasons. Most importantly, most of those improvements that you put in the ground have a useful life of 20 to 30 years, if not 40 or 50 years. As well as the fact that there is a ready available funding source through the State Environmental Trust Fund that would provide us with low, and in many cases almost 0% financing to do that. And the big advantage is that we're able to finance for 20 plus years, where if we do it ourselves, generally once you get past a 15-year time frame, you see your interest costs spike dramatically because of the uncertainty. On the current side, and again we're talking about the garbage trucks, fire apparatus, basically the big ticket items in DPW primarily. Unfortunately, where we are is that we have the two biggest pieces of equipment are scheduled, they were just purchased at the same time and they're scheduled to be retired at the same time. So that's going to take a little bit more of what I would say asset review to determine what we can schedule opposite those planned replacements, so that we have, again, the goal would be to have level costs every year, whether it's indebted costs or, as we prefer through a pay-as-you-go, a capital reserve set aside.
It would be nice to see something soon.
And I agree. And I should also point out that part of our analysis has been that we have reviewed all of our capital. And as John has indicated, there are funds available, certainly on the utility side, in the amount of $300,000. On the current side, we have not only the $50,000 of unreserved, or I should say undesignated reserves, we also have a significant amount of funding that was allocated in that most recent bond ordinance for road and drainage improvements.
I think that was 300,000 or so that was
correct, 300,000. And we're looking at really trying to play catch up a little bit. I mean, Sandy put us behind. Our priorities as to the projects that we were going to do was completely shuffled as a result of Sandy. So our goal is in this year to clear out what I would call the backlog of capital projects that are already in the pipeline, utilize the funding that's already been allocated, because frankly at this point we're paying interest on that $300,000 of road and drainage improvements, and try to clear the deck this year on the projects that there's already funds available for, instead of starting to put money aside for next year. But I certainly understand your point, and again, I guess it has been this decision of the governing body in the past few years to, because of the economic uncertainty, to reduce the impact or maintain the level of taxation where it currently is, without having to put unnecessary funds aside. I don't want to say unnecessary is in terms of whether they need to be spent, but a determination as to when they'll be spent, whether it's this year, next year, or sort of ramp up to that as the economy improves. Any other questions on capital or debt service?
Well, the only thing I was going to say is that we certainly are in a good position in terms of our equipment. Due to the equipment replacement that we did 2 years ago, we're certainly in a much better position. I think Hurricane Sandy threw a chink in everybody's armor as far as that goes. We had to outlay a lot of money concerning that. Money that we should see back, but again, you don't want to plan until you've gotten it back. But certainly I would be in favor of in the future moving toward that, and I know I've had that discussion before, that there's also something we should consider in terms of our equipment, and that, say, for example, as you mentioned, Tom, we had garbage trucks for 17 or 19 years. Well, maybe we keep one for 7 years, sell it, take the money that we get from the sale, and have some money saved up to buy a new one. So then we've got a garbage truck that's new and one that's 7 years old. That we stagger this equipment in some way, shape, or form. The same as with the police cars. Perhaps we would have to do something a little better on that, because
well, we just think ahead a little bit better.
Right. But to sort of come up, as Jay said, come up with a long-range plan whereby we're replacing equipment. I think we went probably over 10 years, and Patty can probably attest to this as well. We went over 10 years with no equipment being built at all.
Absolutely.
And you know, our
And-
council addressed that.
Right.
But the point is that my intention of taking the bond out, which, you know, was something that we had to do at the time. But my intention was we were going to basically learn from the fact that we didn't have anything saved up to buy all this equipment that we needed. So, and I understand we could just replace this bond in 10 years. You know, we can just do the same debt service and in 10 years just replace the bond and hopefully we have the same rates, you know, good rates and everything else.
But I doubt.
My point is that the intention was when we did the bond is that we were going to start saving money so that we could replace the equipment on our own without bonding.
While we're on the subject of debt, I would also point out, and again, I'm referring to the pink package. The first page is the annual debt statement. And that summarizes the status of our debt as of the end of last year. So this is 12/31 of last year. And on the first page, the bottom figure represents what is termed our net debt, and it's expressed as a percentage of our total assessed valuation on a 3-year average basis. There's a calculation that's done, and this is that calculation, to demonstrate what level of debt we have in comparison to our property values. What is significant about that is that there's a statutory limit of 3.5% on our total indebtedness, and we are at 0.27%. So we are less, or just about,
basis points.
we are at 1/4%. So, and
We're
I,
very solid.
That's a good thing, but we
Yes,
would
that
like
is a
to
good thing.
keep it there. That's my point.
And historically.
And my point is that we want to save money so that we can keep it.
Well, the other thing, historically, looking back at, if anybody's talked to colleagues who live in different towns, and you know, you find that they're paying like twice as much in taxes as, you know, as we are. So I mean, we would like to keep it. That we have a pretty good deal here, you know, and I think most of us would like to keep it. And I understand too that sometimes you have a debt and maybe it makes sense to pay that debt off rather than saving money today. But that's the ultimate goal, is to build a war chest for the things that are needed.
But at the same time, given the economic uncertainty that still exists,
Right.
we also don't want to add burden if we don't have to.
Agreed, totally agreed.
and the other side of that is that, you know, there are items, in the perfect world, there would be no indebtedness at all by the municipality, particularly in a municipality that is not growing. But the reality is that there are some costs, and I'll use the, utility's probably not a good example, but I'll use a park improvement as probably the best example. Frankly, the benefit of that is going to, an improvement like that is going to benefit not only the people that are here today, but the people that are here 20 years from now. So there's also the argument that they should pay a share of that as well. You know, it's the argument about you own a car and you bought it 2 years down the road. I'd start carpooling with you. You've invested a lot of money in buying that car, and I'm just coming in and paying for the gas. It's a similar idea that those that receive the benefit should pay the full cost, or at least a portion of the full
You
cost.
throw in a cup of coffee and we're good.
Okay.
So you're saying that if we start saving for garbage trucks today, that all the residents are paying for 4 garbage trucks instead of 2?
That's unfortunately the problem, because right now they're paying for the 2 that we have.
I
And
enjoyed the argument.
So there's a happy balance there, and we'll have that discussion. In any event, I think that covers pretty much the debt and capital, which, in my opinion, is probably one of the most important discussions that we should have. Certainly, the appropriations on a line item by line item basis are important, but those represent our ongoing operating costs. And all too often, it is very easy to focus on, you know, an appropriation for a particular department and miss what I consider to be the big picture, which is the capital improvements in the community, the level of debt, and how those capital improvements are being financed. Because again, the improvements that the governing body authorizes, whether they be street road improvements, park improvements, they really reflect the character of the community. And, particularly the streets and roads. That's really, people talk about curb appeal of home values. Well, curb appeal starts with the street, before you even see the house. And we are fortunate that for the most part, we have done a fairly detailed analysis of our roads, and we're in pretty good shape. We're going to utilize DOT funding when available to maintain those roads. We do have some drainage issues, frankly, that unfortunately the drainage problems are not always on the streets that are in the worst condition. So you'll be seeing from us as we move through the year, and we're going to have this discussion specifically on this DOT grant that we've received, the priority list as to which streets get done and how much of our efforts are going to be on the paving as well as on the drainage issues.
How about sidewalks on Old Road?
Well, I'm not going to touch sidewalks because that seems to be a controversial
That's
question.
what I want. I want sidewalks on Old Road. For safety purposes, for kids.
Again, I don't know if there are any specific questions or comments. I think at the last meeting I did a fairly detailed line-by-line
Detail on
review.
that, yes, you did. Anyone have a question of?
What's a penny for this year?
100, and I'm going to refer you to the worksheet. It's $115,000.
Okay, so here's my question. In terms of, when I look at the salary structure, we have some groups of workers have been, without a collective, or their collective bargaining agreement expired on 2010?
That's correct.
Okay. So at some point I assume that's going to be negotiated.
That's correct. At some point, hopefully,
Okay.
hopefully soon it'll be settled.
Okay.
Somebody's watching there.
All right.
Somebody's,
So that's coming
out
up.
of the count.
All right, the police contract is coming up.
The police contract is good through the end of this year.
This budget year?
The end of this budget year.
Yeah, okay. All right, and then what about the job category administration? Is there an increase this year for administration?
Well, if we, at the direction again of the committee, there has been what I would call a cost of living adjustment built into these budget appropriations.
Okay, so the
2%.
So the public works
2%.
received a 2%
We
cost of living?
have calculated again, I don't want to delve into collective bargaining.
Yeah, no, I'm not asking you to, I understand
But we
that.
have, this budget
It
includes
includes it.
a percentage and dollar amount to cover a projected increase in the event we're settled in the current year.
Okay.
We have also reserved, I believe, in prior year,
Is that in each line?
yes.
And we
All right.
reserve the prior year's commitment.
Okay,
So-
all right, so my concern was next year, are we sitting on a possible large increase because we're kind of kicking that can down the road? And you're telling me
Well,
that can is in the budget?
Let me, it's partially in the budget. And it's in the budget to the extent that in the current year, we have, there are funds included to reflect the 2013 increase. But I would point out that, and I'll talk specifically about the public police, we still have 4 officers that are within the steps. So in addition to whatever cost of living adjustment is made, we have a fairly significant number, I mean, that's more than a third of our police department, are receiving stepped increases, which are above just a cost of living adjustment.
Okay.
And again, we actually, in all of our collective bargaining, we have a 2-tiered structure, depending on when an employee was hired.
Right.
Generally, that cutoff is pre-2007 or post-2007. And we have employees in the police that are still going through that scale. On the public works side, we also have 2 employees that, if I understand my notation here, I believe next year they reach their max.
Okay. All right, so I guess my question for you, Jay, or maybe the council, is because we are in right now a 0 increase year, okay? You know, we don't know what's going to happen next year. We do have some responsibilities that are gonna kick in terms of contracts and things like that. You know, is there anything that we can take care of this year for whatever, a half a penny that puts us ahead of the game for next year? So in terms of being a little more proactive this year, because it seems to be a good year, can we take care of something that will help us next year so we don't end up sitting on a larger tax increase next year?
Well, certainly that's a policy question. My only caution would be if it is the consensus of the governing body to factor in an increase, that that revenue be reserved in some fashion so that it's not allocated as additional.
See, what I'm trying to avoid is, sure, great, zero tax increase this year, that's great, but is that creating a much larger tax increase next year?
If I could, Councilman, the other side of the equation besides the appropriations are the revenues. So if you see an uptick in your revenue figures that are going to balance out those type of contractual obligations, then it's a wash. But to say we can't basically prepay expenses in this budget year in order to reserve.
No, I understand that. I understand that.
Yeah. But certainly there are mechanisms for us to do just what you said. And, the most common is that we project the budget based on an estimated tax collection, and adjusting that has the ability, or simply reducing the amount of surplus that's being used in the current year could factor in. But again, that's a policy question and decision by the government.
You could vote no to pay increases.
Chris, is that?
No, that's good, thank you,
That
Mayor.
thank you.
It's a very
No, I
conservative.
mean, I'm just putting it out to the council, can we do something, is there anything we can take care of this year to keep whatever happens next year a little more stable? That's all, put it out. If not,
It's certainly not.
okay.
My question is on the revenues. You were saying that the revenues, my understanding of revenues were down, not up.
Well, my point to the councilman was that to look at both sides of the equation. What I interpreted the question as being was, can we do something on the appropriation side to mitigate a tax increase or utilization of fund balance? Now, a simple way of doing it would be if you were to raise taxes, say a penny. That's you would decrease the reliance on the utilization of fund balance, and thus use that fund balance in the future year.
Well, it becomes the savings account.
Yes.
It's a factor.
To be used for. So there are a lot of mechanisms we can employ, and certainly between now and final adoption, once again, this is your budget. So if whatever you want to do, we can make that happen for you. That's what we're doing.
Thank you.
And as I mentioned at the previous meeting, there are some revenue differences this year. Last year we had the fire the funds that were essentially the surplus that we pulled over, or that the borough pulled over with the dissolution of the fire district. That was
That
used.
made it easy for us to have a zero tax increase last year.
That's correct.
Or what, give back the overhead of the fire district. That's what we did.
Yep.
Thanks to John Lewis,
Given
by
back
the
the
way.
administration.
But, so we were able to give that back. But the point is that we don't have that next year.
That's correct.
Next year, we're not gonna have it next year either, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so,
But the fact remains that this is now the 4th year in a row where we have kept our taxes stable.
right,
And
but
that's a
I'm
very good
saying,
thing, and not only have we kept our taxes stable, we've helped our residents keep a stability in their lives by keeping our taxes stable. And lastly, we've done it while maintaining a 0.27% debt to real estate value. That is an astonishing feat in any town, and there are many towns that don't even come close to this in terms of how we've managed not only our debt, but our revenues. We're in very sound financial condition.
My point is, we've gone through several years with zero tax increases. I'm just trying to say, and I knew we could not have done a zero tax increase, let alone a whole $17 refund to people, but, which I thought was a little ridiculous. But anyway, so we gave the $17 back to everybody, every household. But my point is whether or not we should be worried about the next year, or if we're going to worry about whether or not we have to actually put something to vote.
Well,
What do you see? What do you see in the?
In terms of our obligations, do you see something?
What do you see in your crystal ball as far as what we're looking at next year? What are we looking at?
Or your 8 ball, whatever.
I think half will answer that, Senator.
And your best estimation, what are we looking at next year?
You got that crystal ball. You
Take the 8 ball.
As opposed to the capital budget that we would do a multi-year plan, to say at this point what next year is going to foretell as far as tax increase is, at this point, has not been calculated. As far as any type of retirements that you would basically, whatever the policy is as far as attrition
Please.
on the,
Give an entire retirement golden parachute. Okay, so we're gonna have to give that because they voted on it in December.
and so there's a lot of different factors. Certainly your tax, your debt service starts leveling out as far as those payments, so that reduces the appropriation. And then any type of new revenues or increased revenues, that balances out. The reality is this, and I don't live in your town, I live in another town, and I work in multiple towns. Eventually, you're gonna have to, increase taxes, whether it's politically expedient or favorable to the residents. The reality is that, as you start giving, if revenues stay stable and you give a 2%
Right.
increase to your employees, you gotta find that somehow on the revenue side, you appropriate fund balance, or you're gonna need to pass that along to the residents, unless you find other cost-saving measures. And this is a lean budget, this is as
lean.
it gets.
But I should point out, and you somewhat added the other cost savings. This budget reflects the commitment of this governing body that started before I got here, in terms of changing the structural element of how the operations are conducted here, how services are delivered, the utilization or the expanded utilization of part-time employees, the reduction in force that has been affected through attrition. And I've distributed to the council a very recent retirement that we will see, or actually, essentially, it's effective today, or I guess May 1st.
No, May 1st.
So, again, in Public Works, the utilization, increased utilization of part-time employees has increased the productivity in terms of what the actual cost of delivering the services are. We have also identified some other structural changes in terms of how services are delivered that will not dramatically reduce our costs, but are at least setting us on a path of reduced costs.
But see, I think we're just getting by. We're not saving any money. See, that's what I'm saying. You say attrition and somebody retired. Well, let's put that money for the garbage. Let's put that money aside. But we're not putting that money aside. That's what you're
And I
telling me.
can't argue
We're
with
basically
that observation.
But that doesn't mean we don't have any money.
But the other thing, Councilman, is that should those retirements get known during the end of this year, and we know we can count on those. I mean, separation of service. A lot of people put in retirement papers and protect their beneficiaries should anything happen to them in the vested system. But if there are savings, known people that have left here and we're not going to replace them, or other cost efficiencies, we can then start appropriating with the council's blessing those funds for what we would be in a rainy day or replacement fund.
For example, on the person that's retiring.
My point is that for a zero tax increase, we are not doing probably what's in the best interest of the town for a zero tax increase this year.
I disagree.
The best interest of the town would be to start saving for,
Not true.
to replace these
For the tax.
equipment. And so I'm just, listen,
Yeah, I would offer to you this, the reality is, we could go into future year budget, if we just bring it back to 13.
we didn't have any conversation before the budget. If we had a conversation before this budget was presented, that would be the appropriate time to say, listen, but the budget's already done, and so.
And certainly, it's a purview of the governing body to amend it, and we will be amending it to tweak out some certain appropriations. So at that point, it's plenty of time to have those discussions.
One other
It
way.
should also be noted that the person that's retiring is budgeted for a full year's salary. So if that person's going out May 1st, that means we have 7 months of that salary to capture. That is not reflected there. This full salary and benefits are reflected here.
We'll help us next year.
Yes, and it'll help you even in this year.
Well,
It'll help that
yeah,
fund go up.
exactly.
Right,
That's our rainy day fund, right?
exactly.
There, just
A lot of people
to,
retire.
I believe Councilwoman Cindy asked a specific question that I wanted to answer, which was, potential cost increases, and I've just done some quick calculation, just in terms of the 4 officers in police and 2 public works employees that are part of our current staff. We're looking at approximately $55,000 in additional costs next year as those employees go through the step.
Right.
So-
That's another
And that's without increases? Without general increases? Because
That's right,
the
that's-
police are
Those
gonna be
are
under.
step
step
progression.
The police, you know, without any, you know, they very graciously accepted a 2-year freeze. And they, it's 2% this year, right? 2% this year, and next year, you know,
Whatever.
they're gonna have an increase. And
Absolutely, and again, this is probably the appropriate point to point out that government, particularly this government, provides services. And the cost of providing those services is primarily reflected in our labor costs. Yes, you look at our overhead, you look at our insurance, but when you actually calculate our salaries and the direct benefits of health care costs, pensions, social security, you're talking about 70% of our entire budget. So, yes, at this point, we are really, there have been systemic changes. We have reviewed the operations in terms of increasing productivity, reducing costs.
We're on the right path.
But we haven't gone the next step, which is the bigger bite of the apple is what services, if any, are to be reduced, because that's where the direct cost is.
And the other thing that will be a contributing factor to reduce your expenses as we move forward is the healthcare reform, where employees are paying a percent more, quadruple for the first year.
they give people raises.
So that's going to be something that's going to mitigate your, basically, so as we speak about, 2% salary increases, but, they're at a max, they're going to be paying almost 35% of their true healthcare costs. So for the average employee across, and let's take out the employees of this borough, but across, New Jersey, they're seeing their take-home pay get reduced because of this healthcare. And being an employee, it's time is coming with this. It's no free ride as you kick the can down the road. So it's going to be balanced, and those are going to be the figures that we're going to need to see what we'll realize this year, because I guess July 1st, those increases will kick up. So we'll see what the true value of that money is getting brought back, and then next year we can anticipate more money getting brought back to us through employee reimbursements. So there's not the black clouds.
Don't get me started on employee reimbursements
It could be worse.
for the healthcare. They give raises.
Not analogous.
Question, Jay?
But again, I want to just perhaps summarize by saying that this budget serves several purposes. It's obviously the legal document that authorizes appropriations and provides us, the borough administration, with the resources in terms of dollars to purchase things, as well as to provide salaries. This budget is also a document that reflects the priorities of the governing body in terms of capital. And again, I mentioned early on that we have reduced our specific capital projects this year for reasons that I believe the governing body understands, and I guess time will tell whether there's consensus on moving in that direction. But again, the budget, it's a document that reflects the compromise among the council. And it's prepared on the basis of the direction that's been provided, the goals that have been formulated for us to achieve, but those goals are ultimately up to the governing body to either agree with or disagree with, and to suggest changes if necessary.
I just want to point out that I don't know about anyone to the right of me has had any input into this budget. Maybe they have, but when you say that this is something that we've come up with, we wanted, whether or not we wanted budget meetings and everything before this all came to pass, that was the case. But the budget was prepared, it was introduced. 3 of us voted no because we didn't have any input in the budget. So to say that this is the council's budget,
Well,
I have to
ultimately,
disagree, but ultimately.
Well, I would,
vote for it, it's the council.
no, I would say I voted no because I didn't have enough information, but I think on the whole, it is pretty good.
I'm curious.
You know what I mean? And it actually
I'm
is,
curious.
it goes along with my philosophy too, frankly, of pay-as-you-go, and reducing our systemic costs and everything else. So
Which we're doing.
in that sense, I think we have had an input.
I would just like to consider the savings account if
Savings.
we want maybe a half a penny or something. Or if there's something in the budget that we think we can put into the savings account, that would be, just to be proactive.
It would have been good to have done it, but, you know, considering what it took us to recover from the snowstorm of a couple of years ago and then Hurricane Sandy, it just didn't allow for it. And yet to still, you know, because residents, again, there are still so many people in this town that are unemployed. They're just doing everything they can to hang on to their house.
But we had $300,000 from the fire that we could have.
And it went right back to
That
the
last
people.
year.
It went
We
right
could
back
have
to the
saved some
people.
of that money.
And I should point out that
We did give them that money.
there is the possibility that there may be an increase forced upon us by state review. It is not uncommon for the state, particularly because we're anticipating the FEMA reimbursement. The state may take a very hard line on that and say, until you actually get the check in your hand, you can't anticipate that.
Right.
We've had preliminary discussions on that basis. We are not the only town that's in this position.
Then why would we even consider a zero tax? If we are going to go down the road of what, emergency?
Well, it's actually just the opposite of what you're suggesting, which is,
No,
we know the money's coming in,
No, 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 no,
so
no.
if it comes in January 2nd of next year, we've simply pushed that money into this year when we spend it extra. So, again, there are good arguments on both sides of that.
Just give me a definition of, I'm sorry, clarify a savings account for me. How do we tell the taxpayer, by the way, I want to install a savings account, we're going to raise your taxes 3?
Well, I'm not suggesting raising taxes.
I'm curious.
I'll be on the record saying absolutely not.
No, I just wanted, I asked for a definition.
I'm
from
not saying
Jay.
that the budget
I
was
asked for
clearly
a
looked at enough
definition
to
from
even
Jay,
know
not you.
whether or not we could have saved
Do
it.
we have a definition of
I don't-
that?
The term savings account is really not a municipal term.
I didn't think so.
But I would say that something similar to that would be your fund balance. Basically, the money that we have on site in case of any future needs or appropriating that to balance out any kind of spikes in appropriations. The reality is this budget anticipates the utilization of surplus. It also anticipates amount to be raised by taxation. On that side of the budget, if you want to raise taxes by $115,000 or a penny, then you simply reduce your reliance on your fund balance, and that would be the $115,000 savings for future year use. But once again, the state does not give you any indication or direction on utilization of surplus. On balance, they're the same word, same meaning. That's a local decision. So if you want to utilize all your fund balance and jeopardize your bond rating, and because that's usually what the rating agencies look at, how can you regenerate this? So there's a long-term impact to that. But once again, this is a very lean budget in review. And once we get back the comments back from the state, we might have to adjust the revenues accordingly because of what the administrator said with the FEMA reimbursement. But as I said, it's one of those things. And to your point, I wasn't here for your last meeting. The introduction of budget is not lessening this budget on it. It starts the process of discussions, just like we're having tonight, and you'll have the public speak to you next week or in 2 weeks.
But see, once you put forward a budget that's a zero tax increase, for the council to then vote against it, it's just like last year. But you put forward a budget with a $17 reimbursement to the
Tax cut.
taxpayers. I mean,
It's called a tax cut.
is anybody really going to care about getting $17 back? But, you put forward a budget, and so we all care. I mean, $17 though. And then you raise our water rates 35%, over $100 per household. So my point is really, when you put forward a budget, you're putting your nickel down. And then others, when, quite frankly, we have tax appeals. I brought this up last year. We had tax appeals, and the tax appeals, people are winning their tax appeals. I can say that for a fact.
Actually,
people are winning the tax appeals.
You raised the point that I was going to skip over, but tax appeals, it is worth noting because it is a valid point, and we've had discussion. We have a reserve for tax appeals, and in fact, let's just go through the exercise, making sure that I pointed it out. We
40,000.
we budget
40,000. $40,000 per tax.
As of the end of last year, 12/31, we had $101,000 in reserve for tax appeals. This budget anticipates, and I just, 40,000 is the number, reserve for tax appeals, page 7, line 26, $40,000. So we're adding 40 to that. So
To the 100 and something.
So with this budget, we'll have $140,000 of funds available to cover our tax appeals. And I have not done an analysis, but you raised the question, we'll provide that information on how much we used in the last year. I don't know if you have that.
I don't have any.
There was one that we won.
And
Few and far between.
I would just like to ask, what would bring about so many tax appeals? Why would we have so many tax appeals?
Because of the house, because the reassessment, the reevaluation of the houses was done